Hello, Skyler.
Hi!
How's it going?
Yeah, I'm good. Is that the first question?
Nah, I'm good. Alright. Question 1.
Okay.
How and when did you first come up with the idea of .x?
Alright. .x was a group collaboration in a way. .x began its life as a series of characters and stories created by me and my classmates in 4th grade. They began as Sonic fan characters. By the junior high, the Sonic element was gone, and by the end of high school, I had reorganized it to just be about the characters we made and kind of tied it into Hetry as a whole better and made it into its own cohesive thing. And then the comic is me putting that out into the world.
How did you decide that the way you wanted to tell this story was through a comic?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, that wasn't always the case, but it also was because back in elementary school and junior high, it was told through comics. And what it was is that we would act out the characters at recess, and that was the primary way it existed. But then sometimes I'd draw a comic of the characters, and not like one whole comic, but like just a story at a time as separate individual things. Like a friend would come up to me and say like, "Hey, I have this idea. Can you make this into a comic?" And I'd be like, "Yes," and then I'd draw like 3 pages or whatever. The chapter of the comic now that introduced Sparks is actually very, very close to his introductory chapter back from elementary school. I made it intentionally as close to that as possible because it was a solid chapter. I wanted to reference it, and I needed to introduce Sparks, and I was like, why not just introduce him the way he was initially? It worked.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Then I wanted to make .x into a series of games. That's how it was not always a comic. I wanted to make it into games, and I made most of a game, and I was like, well, I need to introduce people to these characters, so I'm going to make a little comic, a little webcomic to introduce people, and then the games will be the main thing. And so I started the .x comic that you all know, and I, almost immediately, I'd say once the first chapter is on 10 pages in, I was like, oh, this feels so much better than the game. This is how .x should be told as a story. And instead of stopping the comic after 4 chapters, which was the initial plan, I wrote up a 7-year plan, and I'm running with it.
Wow, that's cool. People might make the connection between .x characters and characters from Sonic the Hedgehog in terms of appearance. Was Sonic the Hedgehog a major influence for the creation of .x?
Yes. Yes, it was. To go more into that, .x started as us acting out Sonic characters. And then my friend who came up with Pudding for another project was like, well, Pudding was designed to be Tails' little sister, so she was going to act out Pudding, while the rest of us acted out Sonic characters. And slowly but surely we were all like, well, wait, we want to be our own characters too. And so most of us started making our own Sonic fan characters, and that's how all these characters started. Not everyone, though. So there are some people involved in .x who never really made up their own characters and just always played as Sonic characters throughout elementary school, and I feel bad because they have, no lasting impression on it. But, oh well. The biggest influence Sonic has on it now is just their appearance at this point. At this point, .x is so separated from Sonic, except for in their appearance, and that's something I'm really working hard to now separate from. That's why I'm redesigning characters like Audrey and Hurricane and putting Miles in clothes. And actually, Miles, of course, the biggest connection still to Sonic. I have intentionally not used the name Miles in the past 50 pages. The last time Miles was used in the comic, the name Miles instead of my or brother or bro or something like that was page 250, where Pudding screams Miles' name when she wakes up from her nightmare. And that was intentional. That was intentionally written to be the last time the name Miles is said in the comic.
Oh, wow.
Miles initially was Tails. Pudding was created to be Tails' little sister. So when I got rid of all the Sonic characters from .x, when I wanted to make it into something more and separate from Sonic, I couldn't really justify getting rid of Tails. Tails was Pudding's older brother. He was an important character, just in terms that she needed the older brother. He was still a very minor character, though. So what I did was I changed the name to Miles, which was still very Tails-esque. Didn't really change the appearance. Put the goggles on. But I completely rewrote him as a character. He's an entirely different character. He's a sociopath. He's murdered children, kind of. He would like to continue murdering children, kind of. Miles is a very different character than Tails, but he was never intended to be anything big. He wasn't supposed to be in much of the comic at all, but he was so fun to write for once I made up the new Miles for the comic. He just became a main character on accident. Like, I never intended for Miles to be as big as he is, and he's most people's favorite character based on the polls I've done, and he's one of mine as well. He's become such a huge part of .x, and that's why I'm working so hard to separate him from Tails more and more so as I can.
That's interesting. What does .x mean, and why is that the name of the comic?
That is a fantastic story. There are so many answers to this question. I'm going to tell you two answers. One is the answer I would have given you up until like a month ago, and then the one after that is the real answer that I learned a month ago.
Interesting, okay.
What I would have told you is that .x started as... .x originated with Pudding. Pudding existed before .x as a sidekick to a character named Super Duper Hero X, who I eventually used as Pudding's alter ego as like a reference to that. And so that's where the X in .x comes from. And then back when we were in elementary school acting out these characters, everyone made so many characters that would exist for like a day or two that we then scrapped because we didn't like them for one reason or another. They just didn't stick. And then one of my friends made up a character. Actually, the friend is Terp, the person who came up with Gel. She made up a character named Dot who was created specifically to just be unimportant. Like, that was his entire purpose was relevance. And it was kind of like a joke on how many characters there were flying around at the time. And so he, in an effort to have some relevance, named .x after himself. Like, put his name Dot into the name of the thing. And that's where the name, and it just stuck. The character didn't, but the name stuck. Turns out that's not true. The name .x, and Terp explained this to me, like, within a month ago. .x originated from Sonic X, which was a show running at the time, since it was all Sonic characters. The reason it's .x is just because when they were coming up with a logo for it, my friends just put a period and then an X, like a centered dot, and then an X, and that was it.
Wow.
The character Dot was created separately, but because the thing was called .x, the character of Dot thought everything was about him, despite being completely unimportant.
Wow, I never would have thought that was the reason.
Yeah, neither would have I. It was as much a surprise to me as it was to everyone else. So basically, long story short, the name .x has no real significance anymore, and it just is the name of it.
Cool. I mean, it works. How exactly do you draw the comic? Is it all hand-drawn and then scanned into a computer, or is it all digital?
I mean, both. It's hand-drawn, I scan it in, and then I redo it digitally. Like, almost tracing over the initial hand drawing. It's like I'll have a page, I draw it all out in paper, scan it in, I redo the line work, and then do all the colors and stuff digitally.
Okay, so you trace over the hand drawings.
Yeah.
Cool. When you're designing a new character, what comes first, or what is usually the most important thing that you want to stand out about them?
Ooh, okay. So there are two ways I go about this, but they both stem from the fact that out of every character in .x, including the 12 coming in the ball chapter, all but one of them were created back in elementary school or junior high. Like, all of them. Everybody introduced before Chia is like verbatim what they were in elementary school. That was our main cast of characters. Speedy, Hurricane, Pudding, all of the... I guess not Miles, but all the rest of them. Mm-hmm. Fade, Frisky, Audrey, Danny, Goo, Gel. I'm not going to list them all now. Yeah. Sparks included.
You just did.
No, I'm sure I missed some.
That's fine.
But, Clone. Clone's a big one that I missed. Those characters are all exactly what they have been since elementary school. I have not changed them at all. Again, the exception being Miles. And, like, putting more of a backstory to, like, Audrey and the teenagers. Chia is the first character where I had the concept from the past, either, like, Chia and everybody knew her. Zeta, the newest ones like Moonlight. These characters were something. They were either a sketch, they showed up like in a comic, I remembered that they existed, they were named, they were somewhere. They're in old art files. I have an old drawing of almost every character in the comic, or just a listing of their name. In fact, if you want to put on screen right now, the first drawing of Moonlight, who's now like one of the newest characters in the comic, there she is. That's her original design. And that's all I had to work with when coming up with her for the comic. So for all these characters, Chia onwards, I had to write their personality in a way that A, worked with everything with Hetria, worked with the Dodex comic so far, and B, is something unique. I mean, in this chapter alone, I'm introducing 12 characters, so I want them all to stand out and be memorable so I could use them in the future. And, yeah, I don't know. Each character kind of fills an important role, even if that isn't obvious. Like, I don't know how to explain it without talking about the new characters I haven't introduced yet, so I'll talk about Chia. Chia had a very different everything in the original run of .x. And that's something I'd like to visit in the comic, but I wanted to make her more important, and she was always an older character. So I thought, well, why doesn't she hang out with Audrey and Danny and Miles? So I made her like a mutual friend of them. And I was like, well, wait, this could be like a romantic interest for Miles if I do this right. And so in the adventure chapter, near the end, Pudding says to Audrey, find my brother a girlfriend, or something along those lines. Mm-hmm. And I put that in to lead to Chia coming in very naturally later. So I want everybody to feel organic when they came in. And so back then is when I was first designing Chia for the comic, from what she was. And so that kind of leads into her existence in the comic. And so for all these new characters coming in, the same idea exists, where they make sense in the world. And that's what I aim for. And then I see what I could do with them story-wise.
I've realized as time went on that you've sort of narrowed down what your art style is, and it's improved over the years as well. Are you considering eventually revisiting older pages and redoing them to match the newer art style?
Absolutely. I've wanted to redo that first chapter for forever, but because of how long it takes me to do a page, I'd have to not put up 10 new pages to redo those first 10 pages. So I don't know how I'll ever find the time for that. I will. .x started as I started doing digital art that wasn't pixelated. So the first 10 pages of .x are like the first 10 pages of digital art I ever did. So it was a combination of me just learning the programs, learning how to do digital art, and me just improving over time. And that's why there's such a big jump in the first few chapters, and then I've just been getting gradually better over time, just because I keep drawing. That's how practice works. I want to go back, especially because a lot of within the first 100 pages are pages that aren't colored in, and I really want to go back and do those. And so I think what I do is eventually go back and do the first 6 chapters again, which is the first 100 pages. But not all of them at once. That would take forever. I could see myself doing the first chapter again soon, but I don't know when I'd find the time to. I'd like to, though.
Okay.
And I will one day.
I understand that .x is just a part of a whole universe you've created called Hetria. Could you explain where the characters of .x fit into the grand scheme of things without giving too much away?
So Hetria is the name of it's both the universe all my things take place in, that's the name I use to refer to it, but it's actually the name of the planet that everything takes place on. But Hetria refers to both. The idea to take all my stories and put them all into one cohesive universe rose in about 8th grade. And .x was one of my things. But I had been creating things for Hetria even before, the concept of it. I've been making things since before kindergarten. And so trying to make it all fit together was a bit of a challenge, but it does. And .x is special because .x is one of the few things that doesn't really overlap with other Hetrian stories and characters. And that's why it's such a great introduction. I'm using .x in a way to introduce other Hetrian concepts, like how just everything works on it, without having to explain, and also all these other characters are this other thing, that's a whole other story, but they're connected to this one through this or that. Mm-hmm. .x always has kind of stood on its own, but in making the comic I have connected to more things more, and I'm going to use it to explain Mobians and Angels and all that. I already have used it a bit to explain Mobians and Angels. And there are humans on Hetria. They are the most abundant species. The .x takes place in such a small area. It's like within one region is .x. And so there's so much more to explore and to talk about, but it's weird because in Mobius City, there would be humans there, and that's in .x. So I could just have humans show up in the background of .x, and that would be canon, but I'm kind of avoiding that for now. Maybe near the end of .x I'd put humans in to try kind of like make it spread out into the rest of Hetria better as like an ending, but that's not for a long time.
What's a normal day like for you working on this comic?
Well, I wake up, do any morning things I need to do, shower, brush teeth, etc., eat, and
human things.
Yeah, like any other human. Yes, I am human. Working on .x, each page takes a day and a half, and I don't mean that in terms of like. I mean that in terms of hours. It takes over 24 hours to make each page.
Wow.
And so, so on the first day I'm working on a page, I get up, do my shower stuff. I draw the first, like I do the hand drawing, and that could take anywhere from like 3 to 6 hours. And then I start doing the digital tracing part. Doing the line art digitally is the longest part of making each page. That alone usually takes me from whenever I finish the hand drawing until I go to sleep that day, or longer. It sometimes will spread into the next day, and I just can't work anymore. So the days I work on .x, I wake up, start working on .x, eat in the middle a couple times, go to sleep. That's my work days for .x, and that's 4 days a week.
That's intense.
It's it's not a great system.
How much of the story's plot do you have planned ahead after what's already been made public?
Oh, good question. I mentioned earlier that I have a 7-year plan, but that's not like, here's each chapter in these 7 years. That's, I have the major plot points I want to hit and when I want to hit them, and the rest is kind of a more ambiguous thing. Like, all these characters I'm introducing in this chapter, the initial plan was to have them in there, but I didn't know exactly when they'd come in or what they'd fit in, and eventually I was like, well, if I have Frisky throw a ball, that's a reason to introduce all these new characters at once without having to give each one a chapter introducing them. That would take 12 chapters. That would take forever. There are a lot of things I planned from the beginning that I haven't done yet, and things that I have done already, and there are a lot of fun surprises I didn't think I'd do that I ended up doing, and I really am glad I did. Like, the whole refrigerator chapter was just out of nowhere. I was just like, fridge. I needed one more chapter before I did the next thing, and I kind of just started writing it and went with it. Again, some things were accidents, like Miles being such a big part, and now I've taken that and rewritten the rest of the 7-year plan with the idea of Miles being a major character. Yeah, I have a lot planned, but not everything. I think I have more not planned than I have planned, but the things I have planned, I have had planned for a long time. And I've been like hinting at throughout the entire run. There's a lot of things already in the comic that are going to come back again that haven't yet. Like, I'd say every page of the first chapter has something important that'll show up again later.
Since the designs of characters of .x are based on animals, are there any plans to base newer characters off different types of animals like reptiles or birds?
Oh, okay, that's it. Alright, that kind of goes into the whole Mobian species thing, in that all the characters of .x, with some exceptions, like the one on my shirt, are a species made up specifically for Hetria, and that is a Mobian. Which is just like a mammal thing. I don't really know what to compare it to in real life things, and I guess that's a good thing. But there aren't any plans to introduce any other animal-inspired things like that. There are going to be more Mobians, of course. Angels as well, which are very similar to Mobians because they evolved from angels, kind of. That's a whole thing that you can read about in the introduction page to .x. So there will be angels. There will probably be humans near the very end. There will be more of Gel's species, which I have intentionally not mentioned the name of yet. And beyond that, I think I've got one other species that might show up, and that's like a water-dwelling thing. But I don't know whether or not I'll... Like, I have a character of that species, and I don't know whether I want to make them still that species and update their design for .x the comic, or just make them Mobian. We'll see. But yeah, it's .x is meant to focus mostly on like the one Mobian species.
You've already played with the idea of fantasy as a genre, especially in the Wizard of Oz chapter. Fans might be wondering if you would be open to incorporating either other references or other genres in future chapters.
Oh yeah. I try to do a lot of different things with it in terms of uh, genre-wise. Like I've got Miles has all sorts of sci-fi stuff associated with him, and then Audrey's got all sorts of supernatural stuff. And I like having the two together because it's rare that you see sci-fi and fantasy or sci-fi and magic in the same world. But like robots and magic coexist in Etria, so they coexist in .x. In terms of I want to do a mystery one chapter at some point, so that'd be a new genre. Definitely want to have more adventure stuff. Keep going with the humor, the romance, the friendship theme that kind of surrounds the whole thing. I won't do anything horror related, like more so than I already have, and what I have is just more of like, not really horror even, just kind of like intense or like, threatening situations. In terms of references like The Wizard of Oz, I do want to do more of those. In fact, the Wizard of Oz chapter was originally going to be an Alice in Wonderland chapter. And you'll notice that Pudding's pajamas, which were designed before that, so that I could do that, are both Alice's dress and Dorothy's dress, just coincidentally.
Oh, wow.
So I don't know if I will do an Alice in Wonderland chapter, but one that I know I want to do one day is something based on A Christmas Carol, the Scrooge story. But I gotta figure out exactly how to do that.
Have any of the characters changed since you put them in the comic?
Oh, absolutely. Just in terms of, like, obviously design, as you've seen. But in terms of personality, yeah. More so than I, like, would have realized going into it. Characters, like, Speedy was originally... they're all still very close to what they originally were, but certain aspects of them have evolved from the comic that I wouldn't have guessed beforehand. Speedy originally was a lot more hands-on in trying to break up Pudding and Clone, just based back in elementary school. Like, a lot of it was Speedy, like, coming up with these plans in order to break them up, and, like, and Gel, Hurricane, and Fade kind of being, like, henchmen for him whenever he would do this. But other than the adventure chapter, which was, like, the perfect example of that, it never really came up again in the comic, and I feel like it doesn't really need to. I don't think Speedy... Like, Speedy's kind of become more sad and less angry. But, like, in a good way. Not too much so, but more of kind of like accepting that they're together and he kind of has to live with that is where he stands, as opposed to the, I'm going to try to get you to break up. Because really, how do you try to get people to break up? You just have to wait.
Yeah.
And that's a big evolution for the character of Speedy. And everybody's got stuff like that. Gel and Sparks were originally never meant to interact, ever. Sparks was written to originally hit on all of the Mobian girls, and that's it. And then in the Fridge chapter, they both were there, and it's become almost like a running joke, but not even, it's just become like an almost side plot of, like, they were friends, and now they hate each other. Like, we don't know what happened with them, but they interact, Gel interacts with Sparks now more than any other character, and that was never part of the plan. That was the exact opposite of what the original idea was going to be.
That's interesting. Do you yourself have a favorite .x character?
Oh, God. It's like trying to ask me a favorite child. Everybody says that, but it really is. I have some favorites. I could never possibly name one favorite because I love them all so much. Among my favorites are, I guess, like, everybody loves Miles, myself included. I'm just going to end up listing all the characters. I don't know. I really can't pinpoint any favorites. I really can't. I'm sorry.
Okay, no, that's fine. You love them all equally.
I do.
As your children.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite chapter or favorite moment?
Okay. That's... I never really thought about that. Some of my favorite chapters and favorite moments don't always line up. Like, one of my favorite moments is in My Love, My Rival, where Speedy has that, like, out-of-body experience, where there's one page and he's just not reacting to anything, and then the next page it's all hand-drawn and he's not hand-drawn, and he's just kind of, like, separate from the rest of the comic for a moment when putting first introduced. That's one of my favorite moments. A lot of the splash pages are my favorites. A splash page being where the whole page is one panel. So, the Sunset, Nightmare, Freefall, Summer's a big one. Others that I can't remember the names of. I love those so much. The Treehouse one. The 200th page was really big and fun. Chapter-wise, I'll come up with an answer for this one. I think my favorite chapter so far, not including the ball, which will be my favorite by the time it's over. I think my favorite chapter... it's so hard. I might say... It might be like Alone or Nightmare. It might be one of those two. Night Terror, not Nightmare. That's the name of it. It might be one of those. It could be Treehouse. I really like the Treehouse chapter.
I like the Treehouse one too.
That might be my favorite. That's got a lot of good jokes in it, and I always enjoy that. While also featuring a bunch of characters.
Okay. Are you ready for a super deep question?
Oh no. Yes, I am.
The characters of Dadex experience so many emotional ups and downs throughout the story. Do your own emotions influence the way certain characters feel, or are their emotions completely separate from your own?
That's a great question. And a deep one. I thought you were joking. Okay.
Oh, no, I don't play around.
Oh, I like that. That's kind of a two-parter. I'll start by saying, personally, of course, I try not to put myself in my comic. Like, there's no character that's me, that's like my representation of me. I find that I am like the midway point between Speedy, Miles, and Gel, personality-wise.
Okay.
And so, back in elementary school, Speedy was the character I acted out. Like, that was my main character. So I think Speedy reflects me more than anybody else. Less so now than back then. Because I want to separate him from myself, of course. And that's something I've been doing well with the comic. In terms of my emotions affecting the comic, I have two examples for that kind of contradict each other. So the answer is like yes and no. One being the Alone chapter. I went into the chapter alone feeling great. And just like, oh, I think it'd be a good time for like a sad chapter. It's been a while since we had one of those. And by the time it was done, I was in such a deep... Like, my depression had hit me again so hard. I was so happy to be done with that because it was awful by the end. Like, I love making it. So, again, it's one of my favorite chapters, but that was so rough. Like, I got depressed because of the comic. And I never expected that to happen. So the comic affects my emotions. And on the other end of the scale, I think the most depressed I've been because I suffer from depression from time to time. The most depressed I've been while making the comic was when I made the page Summer, where it's putting Speedy and Gel lying in the grass. And, like, I was going to do that, and then I got depressed. It was already planned. It wasn't like, I'm depressed, and so I'm going to draw them lying in the grass. It was like, I have to draw them lying in the grass here, even though I'm this depressed. And it's one of my favorite pages. And it came out so good, despite what I was feeling at the time, and I love it dearly. And it's a happy page. There's nothing sad in the page at all. It's another important point to note.
I've noticed myself that in several pages throughout Dadex, you creatively use art to convey what certain characters are feeling. And the example I was going to use is when Pudding introduces Speedy to her boyfriend.
Clone, yeah.
So, like what you said about you see the scene happen and then you see it in his perspective.
Mm-hmm.
How do you come up with ideas of how to artistically convey those emotions?
That comes about from me wanting to do fun new things on pages and try to do things differently. For example, I guess the thing you said, but anything with the demon where Pudding woke up from the demon haunting her nightmare. It was page 2 of Night Terrors, and the panel was broken into a cloud breaking to signify her waking up, and that's because I want to stray away from, I don't want every page to be the 3 rows, not 6 panels, or whatever, 8 panels, however it usually comes out as. I want pages to have different looking things, and emotions are strong, and they work hand in hand, different shaped pages and emotions work really well together, and that's kind of where it just works together so well, on page 200, where the tendril of the demon pops the hot air balloon from outside of the panel is another great moment. I guess that's not really even an emotional one, but it's in Pudding's head, so in a way it is.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think emotions are best conveyed through facial expressions and on the outside. You need the outside to show what's happening on the inside, and that's why I try to really play up any points, extreme happiness or sadness or anything like that. I want it to show up. That's everything gets red when Speedy and Clone are fighting, and that's an intentional decision.
Yeah.
Red's an intense color.
Yeah, definitely.
And so that's why I do things like that.
Do you know how Dadex is going to end?
No, I don't. And that might be weird to hear because I was talking about my 7-year plan and talking about how humans will come in at the end. I have my 7-year plan, but that end of that 7 years isn't necessarily the end of .x, but it could be if I wanted to be. If I was done by .x at that point, I could end it there, but I could see myself going on beyond that as well. So I don't. .x, I don't want it to become like a very important thing to Hetria overall. Like, I like the fact that it's just the lives of these characters, but it might end up, like, if I wanted to, I can make it go into, like, they could have an effect on the world. Like, I could have it go that far, but I could also have it stop before that. I don't know yet.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I don't know what the ending's going to be. I know what will happen before the ending, absolutely. But, like, it's not going to end... Well, give me like, let's say 2 characters get together. I won't give any examples, so I won't be confirming anything or anything like that. Let's say 2 characters get together that people want to see get together. I'm not going to end the comic on people getting together. That's the beginning of a relationship. That's where, like, there's more I could do beyond that point. So I know where it's not going to end, if that makes any sense.
No, it totally does. Okay, so now we have fan questions.
All right.
Jolly Payton asks, who is your favorite ship or relationship in .x?
Okay, so as the creator of .x, I have to be very careful answering a question like that, because obviously so much of what I think of .x is canon, because I make it. So rather than answering with anything that is or could... I mean, obviously all the, like, you know, Audrey and Danny, obviously... rather than answering with any of the things that are currently in the comic or might one day be in the comic, I will answer with my personal favorite crack ships, meaning that they are so far beyond the realm of possibility. So my favorite ships that are not going to happen in .x are Speedy and Frisky and Clone and Gel. Clone and Gel, which actually came from the first idea for the game I was going to do before the comic, was very different. And it was just a made-up story rather than adventure. Adventure is a story from elementary school. The original game was going to be something different, and in it, putting in Clone, we're going to pretend to break up to mess with Speedy, and Clone and Joe Joe was in on it. Joe was going to pretend to get together with Clone, but then she started liking Clone in the game that I wrote, and I just kind of liked that from that point. But I didn't like that whole idea as a concept, so I scrapped that game idea, but that ship is still one I think about every so often. And Speedy and Frisky, I don't think they've ever interacted in the comic even. I think their only interaction was Speedy tying up Frisky and threatening to hit her. So I don't know where that one came from, but that's probably my favorite of the non-ever canon ones.
Carson has 2 questions.
Okay.
The first one is, do you have plans on making a second comic, and if so, when can we expect that?
Yes. And I know I mentioned this before, and I think that's where he got the idea to talk about it. I mentioned in the past that the second comic would probably be Revolving Light, which is another one of my series. I've had some characters show up on my art blog from that. I'm starting to second-guess that. I don't know. I want to kind of make... Because Revolving Light's another story from my past that I would make into a comic. I kind of want to make my second comic be something new starting with that comic, rather than revisiting something old like I'm doing with .x. I don't know what that would be yet. I have some ideas, but nothing really fleshed out. As for when, definitely not until after the Ball chapter. That's taking so much time and energy. And I don't know when either. Once I'm able to get .x pages down to like 1 page a day, as opposed to 1 page every 2 days, then I could see myself starting to do a second comic. It'll be a while, but I promise I will do it.
The second question from Carson is, when can we expect a new game?
All right. The answer is never soon. Since starting .x, I've worked on like 5 games, and I've been like, hey, here's a new thing I'm working on, and then it goes nowhere, and we've seen that with Tower of Angels, we've seen that with our Revolving Lights game, so many times. Every time I announce a game, it never sees the light of day. So, here's what I'll say about that. There are so many games I want to make, but I don't have time for, like a second comic. I promise I am working on games. I'm working on a game right now. I'm working on... Well, I'm not going to say. But fans of .x will like it. Hopefully this year. Probably not. But I'll make it... I want to keep making games so badly. I need, like, a team. I can't do it on my own anymore, is basically what it comes down to.
They take a long time.
They take a long time.
Advocate of Void asks, How much time and effort do you put into each page? You kind of addressed that already, but if you wanted to go into any more detail.
Too much time, too much effort.
Okay.
Yeah, like a day and a half, and all of the energy I have. I wake up in the morning tired. That's my life at this point. Even on days I'm not working on the comic. And I don't mean like, oh, I don't want to get out of bed tired. I mean like, I'm 4 hours into the day and I want to sleep still. But, well, that's more on days I'm working. Like right now, I'm not working, so I'm energetic.
That makes sense. Secret Keeper 626 asks, do you know how many characters there will be at the end of the comic?
I don't. I don't know how many characters we have total before the ball. I think it's like 13-ish. There's 12 being introduced in the ball. I could think of 7 off the top of my head. I won't say them now, but that are not coming in the ball, but will come in the future. And there will be more beyond that. I kind of want to revisit each and every little spark of an idea I could find from elementary school and turn that into a full character in the comic. There's a lot. There's some that I'm sure that I will never find, so they won't come. The character of Dot, who I mentioned earlier, I'm intentionally not putting in the comic just because that's how irrelevant he is. But there will always be more. I also mentioned earlier that out of all the characters, only one character that was not from elementary school or junior high. That's a character showing up in the ball, and they have been created since the start of Dot X. They're a very special case, and as Dot X goes on, there might be more like that. I don't know. But there's no solid cap on characters coming. And there will probably be other characters that are only in for one chapter, like, as of right now, Hatchet and the Pirate.
So that was it.
That's all?
That was the last question.
Oh, man. Wow. That's it. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you for reading .x. It's been a wonderful 300 pages, and making it is only worth it because of all of you. So, thank you so much, and I'll see you for the next 300. Bye.